I think this is the power of open source, the power of transparency. Things happen fast, but they also get corrected fast. And it's just a reminder to not believe everything you read. And Chris,
Hey, Brad.
good to see you, man. I know you read docs all day, and we're like, I'm not in podcast mood, so thanks for hopping on anyways, because I'm out tomorrow.
No worries. Good to see you too, Brad. Let's do it. Let's pod.
All right, one topic today. So there was this paper exploring the MIT mathematics and EECS curriculum using large language models. So basically they got GPT 3.5 and 3.4 to solve some of the hardest MIT coursework that's in there. And so they have like 4,500 questions of like MIT mathematics and electrical engineering and computer science that you need to obtain a degree. They say our results demonstrate that GPT 3.5 solves a third of it. Okay. What it is, okay, here's the GPT-4 achieves a perfect rate. So this got 100% on, like, let's say the most complex math questions that are kind of in existence for undergrad. So really big deal, really exciting, really crazy, or you would think. So it turns out, like, when you read this, it's kind of BS. And
Really? Okay.
yeah. And so when I first read it, I had very similar things. I'm just going to go over these guys' Notion doc because they spent a lot more time than I do. So it was like amazing results. And then it's like, what? Like when you read into it, because I was just blown away that I could do that because I've been the one solving these MIT exams and they're unbelievably difficult. Like it takes sometimes it would take me a month or 2 months to do it. Sometimes my professors would give like impossible problems because when you do research, not everything's cookie cutter. And so part of being a good researcher and mathematician is like you can identify when a problem is impossible to solve. And so I was really surprised by this. And I went in there and then I just started finding holes and these guys documented it really well. And I think before we begin,
So this is like a Notion document that some just people online put together, kind of critiquing.
Yeah, it was some.
okay.
It was three guys, Renak, Neil, and David. They're seniors at MIT in the electrical engineering computer science.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and so they do experiments. They just tear this paper to shreds. But I think this is the power of open source, the power of transparency. Things happen fast, but they also get corrected fast. And it's just a reminder to not believe everything you read. And we'll get into that in the end, but maybe let's just jump into some of the critique they have here. So they go into it and try to replicate the results. So there was maybe take a step back in what they're doing here. So what they did in the paper is they tested GPT 3.5 with zero-shot learning, and then they tested GPT-4 with zero-shot learning. So that just means without any data or example questions in the context. And then they did few-shot learning, which is give it some examples, and they did some other stuff and measured the results. So the zero-shot learning, they reported 90% accuracy, and with the one-shot learning, they reported 100% accuracy. And by the way, anytime you see 0 or 100, it's always a red flag in my mind.
Yeah.
And so in reality, when they went into there, it was actually only like 62% accuracy on the zero shot, not 90% accuracy. And so if you look at the critique here, it's quite interesting. So the first is problems with the data. There was just a lot of unsolvable questions, which is around 4% of the test set. So for example, the whole question is, below you were given the delays for different gates you were permitted to use in part D above. Compute the propagation delay from your circuit from D. So it's like, you just don't have the context. Like even if, let's say you were the smartest person in the world, how would you know what was in part D? It could be anything. Another question was, which invocations run in parallel, assuming there are enough, those are non-answerable questions, and they give a huge list of these unsolvable problems. And so that's already a red flag. It's like, okay, how did they solve?
Is that suggestive of the researchers not fully understanding their test? Because if that's like they should know 100% isn't feasible, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And so I think it goes much deeper. Maybe they were just kind of caught in this hype and publishing early. I don't want to assume they were trying to do this purposefully. So like, we'll give them the benefit of the doubt, but it gets even crazier. So there was information leak in the few shot examples. So essentially what they did is in the few shot case, they give it some examples. So what they did is they did a vector database lookup, which just kind of answers how semantically similar two questions are. So like, for example, it's like what 1 + 1 = 2, and maybe something similar to that. It's like 100 plus 100 is 200 or something. So I'd use that as an example. 100 plus 100 is 200. And then they would use that as an example in there. The problem was just like the examples they used oftentimes were identical. So it's like giving the answer in the question. So there were just a huge amount of these were just completely the same. So it's like, Chris, okay, I'm going to ask you a question. 1 plus 1 is 2. And the question is what's 1 plus 1? So,
cheating. Red-handed.
Obviously, you're going to get that correct. And
so they trained it on the answers. Great job.
Yeah, exactly. It's just kind of crazy, and it gets even crazier. So what they also did is about 16% of the data. Okay, so there was data leakage. Some questions weren't even answerable. And then the third thing in the methodology of this, they allowed it to retry. So what they did is they said, okay, you didn't get it correct. Chris, you didn't get the answer correct. Try again. Oh, you didn't get it correct, try again. You didn't get it correct, try again. So they let it keep trying and trying. And so 16% of the test set was like multiple choice, or so like, you're like, the answer's A. I'm like, you got A is not the answer. Try again.
B.
Like, B? So 16% of the data, like if you just kept guessing, you would get the correct answer. So basically it would just continue prompting over and over until the correct answer is reached. So
did they mention a limit on that? Like, can it retry a certain number of times, or it's just
they just kept running it until
because you can retake the SAT, but there's rules.
Yeah, but they don't tell you which questions are.
Yeah, and they don't train you on the answers.
Yeah, and so maybe the kind of most significant error, or if these weren't significant enough, is the problem is they also just let GPT-4 grade itself. So it was like, if you, it would be like, hey, Chris,
I remember those self-graded exams.
You're going to grade yourself on it. So they were testing GPT-4 and then using GPT-4 to grade the results. So maybe it's okay. Maybe it's okay if you had GPT-2 and GPT-4 was grading that, because it's as if you have Einstein grading your physics homework. You're like, okay, he may be wrong. I'm not saying he's not wrong, but it's going to be reliable. But if you have a beginning student or Einstein grading his own work, that just doesn't make sense. And so they said in there that they double verified manually the grading on the test. I don't know if they did. Someone posted this meme. It's like, teacher, please rate each other's work on yourselves. So it's like the North Korean generals. They have a ton of medals here. So what's also interesting is if you look at the GitHub repo where they did this, they actually deleted the test set later. So if you go in there, the advisor, this guy, he's a visiting professor from BU. I don't think he's a full professor at MIT. He went in there and deleted it. He was probably oh no, we're getting all this backlash and
suspicious.
Yeah. So anyways, what is the big thing here, and why did I bring this up? And I mean, there's some undergrad students. Should we fault them 100%? No. Should we fault the advisor who didn't look at this? Yes. Should we take this as a learning? Yes. And should we use this as an example of what not to do? Definitely. And so what this really brought up to me is so important to just not believe everything you read. I think it's so important to be nuanced in your beliefs. I had a math professor that if you just said you didn't know, it actually didn't mark you as bad as if you were confidently wrong. And I think that's actually very powerful. So all your beliefs in my physics courses, I never liked experimental physics. I always liked theoretical physics. But what I loved about experimental physics, they were very rigorous. And so one of the first classes in experimental physics, they were like, there's no such thing as a number. If you ever give us a number, we're going to fail you. Everything in the real world is distributions, or everything has an error bar. If I say, Chris, what's your height? I don't know what your height is, but let's just say it's 6 foot, or you're 6'3" or
6'2".
Yeah, 6'2". So you're not actually 6'2", right?
Right.
Maybe you're an atom over 6'2", or so the more correct thing would be to say I'm 6'2" plus or minus a centimeter or a half an inch, or because there's some error in your measurement device. And so that may sound pathological, but it becomes really important in things like this. So you could say okay, these guys at GPT-4 solved these MIT exams with 100%. I just read this paper, so I'm maybe 30% certain that this is actually true. And so because this thing took off like wildfire and all kind of the AI spheres. And so it's people spreading it and then they treat it as certainty. And I'm just seeing this trend in the world about what is truth. And in the news, everything's reported instantly and happens so quickly. And so the question I raise is how do we know what is true? How do we know we should wear masks? How do we know we shouldn't wear masks? How do we know this scored 100% or not? It's all very confusing and very important to think for yourself and to answer the question yourself of how do we know it's true? And it's not an easy answer. And there's whole fields of philosophy around epistemology about what do we know is true. And we've touched on this before, but it's just a very salient example of this in what's supposedly a very rigorous field. Yeah.
And this happens all the time, right? Like anytime you're reading headlines, they're often referencing some research and maybe a reporter extrapolated a takeaway, and you have to really think about how critically did that reporter read the source material. And if you go to the source material, like we did just now, what do you find for yourself? And in fact, I TA'd a class when I was in university called Scientific Decision Making. And it's an amazing professor that I worked with on this class, but he's a biologist and he taught this class to undergrads about how to take the scientific method and apply it to decision making. And it had this kind of twofold benefit of, one, teaching you what exactly is the scientific method. Because a lot of people assume it's like you reach a certainty. Chris is 6'2", and that's not what it is. It's a method for edging you closer to truth, but it's also a method for disproving your assumptions, right? It's not always just the pursuit of a fact. And then it also had the benefit of planting that seed in people's minds as they go out into other fields that aren't necessarily part of like the scientific realm, and apply this same thinking in business and in the arts and anywhere you are. Like, think about it from that kind of rigorous perspective, and it's a really useful framework to understand anything. So I mean, all that to say, I couldn't agree more. And like, it's always interesting to me to dive into examples and really like, because I do the same thing. I see a news article and I'm like, they link to the source. I just go straight to the source. Like, I want to read the source and then maybe I'll read your reporting. Sometimes I like to invert it just to have my own opinion. And then
people get annoyed with you because people get annoyed with me all the time.
Oh yeah. And
I'm like, if you eat this fancy herb, like you'll live to 1 trillion years old. And I'm like,
and then you're like, well, but
can you
diet's really hard to
and then I'll read the paper and then I'll be like, well, they used 5 people and there's like, can't you just enjoy it? I'm like, well, I just want to know it's true. So there's kind of a bit of a stigma I've noticed. Of course, you don't want to be like the annoying guy that's like everything someone says you contradict. But I do think there's like a stigma. And like you said, like I think also most people read headlines and they don't read the articles. So they'll come up with some headline of like this guy or this girl did this. And then like even in the article they're like, yeah, they like crossed the street. Whereas like like in the headline it's like, Bob Smith like murdered someone and it was like he like accidentally stepped on a cockroach or like I don't know like. And so I think it's really important. And I think what blows people's mind, as you even mentioned with the scientific method, like people tell me all the time, well, I love math because it's so rigorous. Even math is like 100% subjective. So it's based on the Peano axioms, which actually turned out to not even be consistent or exhaustive. So we learned in mathematics from this guy named Kurt Gödel that like you can't even create a math system, like I don't want to get technical, that is consistent and exhaustive. So you can either have it that, okay, this math can't do a lot and it's going to be consistent, or it can do a lot, but you can contradict itself. You can say A is true and make a proof that A is false. So even in like what we call the most rigorous thing, it's all subjective because it's all based on axioms, which you have to believe. So I say, okay, Chris, if you believe these, you don't have to believe them. They're your subjective choice. But if you believe these kind of things are true, but it gets so hard, and that's math. That's like addition and other things. So it's just such a hard problem to know what is true, especially when media is trying to just get clicks and deceive you, and everyone has some agenda, and so I think some of the things that are important is as you said, like there should be, hopefully we can use AI to automatically find the sources, maybe summarize the sources with an AI that you trust, add references. Let's say you have cryptographically verified results, so it's like, okay, we know 100% Chris said this is actually what he said. If you want it, here's the AI summary. If you want more, like here's the link. And I think it's going to be so important in the future, and I hope it's built into news platforms, and there's just got to be a good way to do this. I don't know what it is.
Yeah. I mean, as you said, it's complicated, right? You have to go through like multiple levels, and you have to do an exhaustive amount of reading and understanding. Like, you may have to go teach yourself about some other subject to understand the source material. And so anyway, that could be easier, even if it's just access is easier. Like, you have somebody telling you these are all the places and you can check them. But yeah, I hear you. It's a big issue. And
maybe like the last point is, what's interesting is I feel like the world is cyclic. Like, we have seasons, waves propagate in a certain way that, with drops and valleys. And I can imagine early as humans, knowing what truth is and valuing truth was really important, because I'm like, hey, Chris, eat this leaf. And you're like, like, it was really important to have rigorous truth. And then I think what happened was we got really good at it, and it became less important because, let's say we had one news channel. We had, like, your grandma's like, hey, Chris, like, eat this and you'll feel better. And so there were just not a lot of options, and the options we had were very well vetted. Whereas, like, in the beginning, we had so many options. Should I eat this leaf? Should I eat this leaf? Should I eat this berry, this mushroom? And so there were so many options. And so, like, it was very important that we got this right, because if you eat this mushroom, you die. If you eat this one, you get a bunch of energy. And then it disseminated into a few kind of well-studied options. It's like, okay, let's eat rice, and that's fine. And then now I think somehow with the availability of all these options, this kind of idea of what is truth has come full circle again. And we're inundated with so much, but we don't even know, like, we should wear masks or not, or if this paper is actually true or what. And it's so interesting that it's kind of come full circle.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting the way you speak about the stakes. Like, it's not life or death immediately to you, whether this particular fact is true. So we've solved all those kind of, right? Like, we know what to eat. We can solve a lot of like common illnesses, and we know a lot of like core truths about how to live and survive and exist. And even our most rigorous frameworks have edges. And I think that's an uncomfortable thing maybe to kind of keep in your mind constantly, to know that although we know all of this, there's massive limits beyond it. I mean, even just extending out from our physical environment, if we go up, things become very unclear. And depending how far you go, they just get murkier. So it's hard to hold that in your mind constantly as like a belief system. I'm comfortable with it. But as you said, it's something that can make people uncomfortable sometimes, or make you seem like you're being a bit like nitpicky, because you're like, yeah, but let's really dig into the details here. And it becomes ambiguous. And then people are like, I'd rather just kind of know something to be true or not, right? Binary, it's kind of simpler.
And I think that's fine. And people are busy, but I think you should just match your level of certainty to kind of your claims. So if you're like, hey, I'm really busy, I read this headline, it was interesting, I'm not sure if it's true, but still interesting, I'm just like, that's totally fine. Like, as long as you're certain. But if you're like, this is gospel created by like the hand of God, like, then you start wars over this, that's where I have a problem. So I don't know. Hey guys, if you're watching this to hear, thanks for watching it. I'm actually curious, how do you guys know what truth is? How do you know what truth is? Would love to hear that. Anyways, Chris,
we'll link some materials below. Below for you to find your own truth.
Actually read what you guys are doing practically. Like, I've read a lot on epistemologies, but I would love, like, practically, how do you know the news you're reading is true? I don't know if there's a good answer, but I would love to hear that.
Comment below. What is truth to you? How do you find truth?
All right.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Chris.
Bye, Brad.
Bye-bye.